Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge. Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name's Katie Crane. I am the Pilates professional, and this is another episode of the Pilates Lounge podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I am thrilled to have you here with me today. Now, in the last couple of weeks, if you follow me on Instagram, you will see that now I have been posting reels, and every time I post a reel, then I give you the option to send me a specific word either in comments or DMs. And when I receive that word of the week, which is told to you in the caption, then I send you a free handout. Sometimes the handout is like a downloadable PDF. I've also got a few free workshops on offer, both already in the system. So if you've been following me on Reels, there has already been the free Core Connections workshop, but there's more to come. So if you don't yet follow me on Instagram at the Pilates Professional, you will find me, and I am all about gifting these things to you so that you can really add value to what it is that you're doing in the studio, that you're working, but also so that you can apply some of these conversations that I have with you right here on the Pilates Lounge podcast. So with that said, let's get started today, because one of the reels that I shared was all about, or one of the weeks, because I choose like a topic for the week. And for 1 week, the topic was belly button to spine. And the topic came about because I had gone down to Tasmania, been to a few Pilates classes, and this poor instructor that I went and saw, and she was beautiful, like gorgeous girl, as in like personality was beautiful. You know, she was really doing the best that she could, but she just got stuck on that cue, belly button to spine. And to me, it seemed like she was using the cue because she did not know what else to say. Like when you're trying to get somebody to connect their core, what do you say? How do we tell people to do that? Well, the reality of it is it takes a heck of a lot of self-practice, and not just self-practice, but a lot of self-awareness of really being in tune with your own body through the Pilates repertoire. So it's so much more than getting on your reformer and doing your footwork or your feet in straps or your hands in straps or whatever it is that you're doing. It's more than just the activity of Pilates. It's being very present in the moment when you are practicing that you end up feeling the magic that Pilates can offer. So if you are stuck with some cueing, because we've all been there, it happens to all of us. If you're stuck, then that's okay. Maybe it's time for you to go and practice on yourself. What happens when we become Pilates instructors is we go from being the student, from doing all the practice in our own body, to teaching the student. And sometimes we lose connection or lose touch, or we forget how things feel. And maybe we hear somebody else use a cue, and so we just use it. We don't really think about it. We just assume that the other person using it must know, so we don't necessarily question things. Joseph Pilates was a curious cat. This is really what made him separate to everybody else. This is how Pilates has been so valuable to so many people, is because we stay curious as Pilates professionals. We keep learning, we keep questioning, and we keep pushing the boundaries. So today's episode is a little bit more about the core, which I know we've done plenty of episodes about the core, but the reality of it is the body is really complex. And so I could speak about the core like many, many times. I remember I spoke about the core, about the pelvic floor back in episode 5. So if you have not listened to episode 5 and you want to dive a little bit deeper after today, go back and listen to that one. I touched on the core again in not long ago, actually, in episode 37, I touched on pelvic floor atrophy, specifically for women in menopause. So the core is complex. In fact, our entire body is complex. And so if you are not at the point in your instructing that you realize that some cues are not serving your clients so well, that's okay. The whole point is that we are all continually learning and all continually growing. And because we have this growth mindset, then we're really able to continue to serve our community and show up to our community while they are learning beside us. So I remember when I first started teaching, I knew nothing. In hindsight, I knew nothing, but I felt like my whole world had been opened to this brand new language, to this brand new way of exploring the body. And in the 12 months that I did my mentorship with my mentor, I did learn so much, but I still knew so little. As we teach over the years, and whether you're studying Pilates, whether you're out there teaching, or whether you're just practicing Pilates for yourself and you love the work, either way, that learning is forever. And every time we learn something, then we get to reflect on where it is that we have grown from. So let's get started. Let's get into the juice of this episode. Belly button to spine, in my humble opinion, I don't think that it really serves anybody at any time. And I've heard that cue many, many times. I've used the cue myself many, many times before I really started to feel the work of Pilates inside my own body, like deep inside my body. I also used the cue because I actually didn't know any better. But over the last month, so it's been about a month since I was down in Tasmania, I've been doing a lot of self-practice to really try and figure out why I don't like that cue. Something in my body and my brain, my emotional state is repelled by it. And maybe that's a conversation that I had with one of my mentors along the way. I don't know. But I wanted to understand better why that was. And so while I've been doing my own self-practice in the last few weeks since going to this class where that was pretty much the only core activation cue this instructor used, I've really started to question why that has been the case for me personally. And I have really taken time to feel deep inside my body how I could cue better. So I've got some ideas for you, but first I want to paint a picture of the core for you. Now, last week, I got to speak to David Weinstock, and if you haven't listened to that episode 38, I did ask the question to David because he actually had written a really great article on his website. So if you don't know David Weinstock, then please look him up. It's Neurokinetic Therapy, David Weinstock. He writes some great articles and he writes them all himself. And you can tell when you read these articles from David that they really are reflections of his own experience. And his experience is very vast, like he's a lifetime on top of my experience. But one of the articles that he wrote specifically was around the core. I actually can't remember exactly what it was at the moment, but you could find it on his website under articles or blog. And so I read a few of his blogs before we spoke, and so I did ask him some questions about the core. So if you do want to see the core from somebody else's perspective, definitely listen to episode 38. But this is some of the conversation that we had anyway. These are some of the questions that I asked him, really for clarification, because I thought that was right. But, after 20 years of teaching I'm constantly questioning my own knowledge, and I'm pretty sure that that is a really important trait of a Pilates professional, that you never take information and just sing that as gospel. I think that we want to be taking on board information, pop that information into our toolkit, and then keep questioning that information, like almost keep trying to access the information or apply the information that you learn, but always apply that information with an open mind. So don't just assume because you go to a workshop or because somebody who has more experience than you that they know, because what we know about the body today is vastly different to what we knew 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 100 years ago. And what we will understand about the body in 2 years' time is going to be vastly different again. What happens is it can take a long time for the understanding that we have of the body to actually be available to us publicly. It's quite complex, but for example, when like modern medicine uses an application, then that knowledge has normally been out in the science world for a good decade before that is applied in real world. So I think that that's a really important piece of information that we should take with us, that everything that we are learning is it could be relatively old. Not always, you will go to workshops over the course of your career and it will be cutting edge information that you're learning, and you will have a better understanding of the body in movement compared to somebody who might be working with the body every day in a clinical setting. This is actually the beauty of being a Pilates instructor, is that we are not limited to our information field. So we can gather information from so many different places and we can collaborate all that information. We're really not stuck in a box. And that's part of the reason that I have conversations with people like David Weinstock. He is from the modern medicine world, but he stepped away from that because he did feel so limited, and because his own experience was showing him that he was going to be stuck in a box and he was never going to really be able to serve his people the way that he wanted to with cutting edge information. Just a quick little interruption to say a big thank you to listening to the Pilates Lounge podcast. This podcast is all about sharing our love of movement and Pilates with as many people as possible. So if you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to review us so that we can get the word out there. Also, if you haven't joined us on the Pilates Muse newsletter, it's a bi-weekly newsletter that shares a whole load of information with you. And we also have virtual online education programs. So if you're looking to get inspired and grow even more as a Pilates professional, check us out, www.thepilatesprofessional.com.au. Back to the show. So when we look at the core, we could, to simplify the core, we could think of it as 4 parts. So let's say the bottom of the core is the pelvic floor, and the pelvic floor, it grows out of the pelvis. So it, in modern medicine, says that it attaches to the pelvis, but nothing attaches. It's not like nothing is stuck with sticky tape to any bones. It actually, everything grows out of everything. Everything is cellular. Everything is tissue. So your muscles, ligaments, and tendons grow out of rather than attached to. So the muscles of your pelvic floor grow out of your pelvis. If you looked down, if you had a bird's eye view of your body and it was and everything was clear, so everything was like a window view, if you looked straight down at the very top of your skull, you would go straight down through the middle of your spine, and at the very end of your spine you would see it from the top. It looks like a circle, which is really your ilium and your sacrum all together, and then the muscles of your pelvic floor are joined around in that circular looking structure and act as, I suppose you could think of it like a hammock. Now, your pelvic floor is always toned. I asked my students the other day when we were in our weekend workshop, we were going through some exercises and I asked, is my pelvic floor toned now, yes or no? Mostly it was a yes. And then I did another movement and I said, is my pelvic floor toned now, yes or no? And a few of the students said no. So what I was doing was going from a standing position with my heels together in a small V and my legs straight. So my adductors, my inner thighs were touching. And then I was going into a deep squat position, like a sumo squat. And some of my students thought, after we had spoken about the pelvic floor and how the pelvic floor elevates as it contracts or as it contracts short, then they thought that if my legs were together and I lifted my heels like into a releve, they thought that my pelvic floor was switched on. But if I bent my knees into a deep sumo squat, my pelvic floor was switching off. So it is important to understand that my pelvic floor actually never switches off. In fact, not one single muscle in my body ever switches off until the day that I take my last breath. So when I pass from this world, then all of my muscles will switch off. But until then, every single tissue, every single fiber, every single cell of your being is toned appropriately, ideally, when it's working functionally. So pelvic floor is actually working whether I'm doing a sumo squat or whether I'm standing on my tippy toes. It's just working differently. So when I stand on my tippy toes, then my pelvic floor is contracting, ideally is contracting short, so concentric contraction. And when I'm going into a deep squat, those pelvic floor muscles are contracting long or eccentric contraction. This is the function of the pelvic floor. When we work with pelvic floor dysfunction, so I spoke about it a little bit in episode 37, then sometimes pelvic floor is too tight all the time, but also sometimes pelvic floor is not tight enough or doesn't have enough endurance. So that a lot of activities that we do in Pilates is actually specifically encouraging the pelvic floor to work what I call dynamically, so eccentrically and concentric contraction, so shortening and lengthening, but still contracted in both directions. So it's my pelvic floor. It's the base of my pelvis. When I contract it short, it elevates, partly to hold the flow of my urine, hold my wind. So pelvic floor, part of pelvic floor is like a figure 8, goes around the wall of my vagina and around the wall of my anus, but it actually covers the entire, what would be a hole in the bottom of my pelvis around, all of those pelvic bones. The other end of the core, if pelvic floor is the base of my core, then the opposite end of pelvic floor, of course, is going to be one single muscle, the diaphragm. So pelvic floor is many different muscles and 2 layers, superficial and deep muscles. Diaphragm is one single muscle and it looks like an upside down jellyfish. So if you imagine like a jellyfish kind of just bobbling along in the ocean, then that's what your diaphragm, I suppose, looks like. But pelvic floor and diaphragm work cohesively together while one is elevating. So if my pelvic floor is shortening, contraction, elevating, lifting up, then at the same time, my diaphragm is also elevating, lifting up. That would happen as I inhale, as I exhale, that lift up. I'm sorry, I'm upside down. So as I exhale, and remember, I would exhale. This is how I think of it. Pelvic floor contracts short or elevates when I laugh, cough, or sneeze. So they are all forceful exhalations. At the same time as, and that would happen, so then I don't lose my bladder. At the same time as that forceful exhalation and pelvic floor shortening and elevating, as I'm breathing out, the diaphragm at the same time in concert is also pushing up or elevating to push all of the air out of my lungs. So exhale, elevate pelvic floor, diaphragm also elevates. I expel all of my air, which means as I inhale, so that my lungs can fill with air, my diaphragm must sink down so that my lungs can expand. And at the time that my diaphragm sinks down, because my diaphragm and my pelvic floor work in concert together, my pelvic floor must lower or descend at the same time. It does not switch off. As I inhale, pelvic floor and diaphragm descends to allow for space in the lung so that my lungs can fill with air. And as I exhale, they both elevate to take away or to expel that air. That's how I remember it. Those guys work together, right? So if I am constantly trying to elevate my pelvic floor, because I have heard it from many instructors, and to tell you the truth, I said it for probably the first 2 years of my teaching. So if you are still saying this, it's okay. It's fine. It's not like you're going to kill anyone, but you're also not serving people the best way you could, and you are definitely not helping them get stronger in their core. Potentially, if you are cueing for people to elevate pelvic floor at all, really, if they don't need to, if their pelvic floor is already appropriately toned, or if you are encouraging people to elevate pelvic floor when they should be inhaling, then you're also going to lock down the diaphragm because those guys work together. So one of the great things about Pilates is we do not isolate. Nothing in the body isolates. Everything in the body works in concert, in orchestra. It's just knowing when the string section is meant to be coming in compared to when the wind section is meant to be coming in. So, but if you know that, on the inhale, everything that needs to descend. On the exhale, naturally everything ascends. And so rather than cueing people to, in inverted commas, switch on their pelvic floor, because what does that mean anyway? And how do I know that they're doing it? Because I can't see their pelvic floor. Then maybe you could really encourage people to take a deep breath out, which is really what Joseph Pilates was encouraging people to do anyway. Take a deep breath out. Get rid of all of your air from your lungs. Your pelvic floor is going to follow that. It just happens. Unless there is dysfunction, and we're not talking dysfunction right now. I'm just talking the general makeup of the diaphragm and pelvic floor. Now, remember, I said that everything works in a concert as an orchestra. So the other two main parts of the core, if we think of the core, I guess like a cylinder, or I think of it like a cylinder, but you could think like a closed box almost. Then the other parts are, of course, the multifidi and the transverse abdominals. So these guys also work together. Now, interestingly, a lot of these structure all share tissue fibers anyway, but let's first of all touch on multifidi and transverse abdominals. So my multifidi are like erector muscles that go up and down my spine. I have a lot of multifidi in the lumbar spine, so they specifically act as stabilizers and they help stabilize the lumbar spine. When I look at my spine, if you were to just have your hand out in front of you and widen your fingers. So I'm spreading my fingers nice and wide. Now, I imagine that those fingers are the very ends of my vertebra, and my multifidi are going to attach to one of those little wings on my vertebra, miss one, and attach to the next one. And then the one that I missed, the next muscle is going to attach to that or grow out of that and then grow into the next one up. So my multifidi they layer over each other, and they layer over each other, getting progressively longer. So I have like one layer of them. They're quite short, between 1 and 3 bones, and then the next layer is like between 1 and 4 bones. So they keep layering to support the spine or to stabilize the spine. Stability is required for good movement practice. So both the nervous system requires stability to feel safe and to feel at ease and to not be stressed out. But we also require strong stabilizers to make sure that our big movers are not getting over fatigued. So our big movers, they obviously move us forwards, move us backwards, get us doing all the fun stuff. Our stabilizers switch on like intuitively just preceding movement. So our multifidi are going to act to stabilize the spine, and stability does not mean rigidity. So my multifidi is not like, I'm not bracing. If you notice that your clients are bracing, then I dare say they're probably overworking some of their big global muscles that are designed for moving, and they need to do less. And we've got to remember the spine itself is right through the middle of the body. So even though I can feel those little spinous processes, when I push into my back, that's like just the very little wings of my spine. My spine itself is very, very deep into the body. So I can't necessarily feel my multifidi working, but there's definitely some cues, some imagery, and some specific exercises and some concepts or ideas that I am getting my clients to practice to anticipate that is probably innovating those muscles to do their job. So a lot of the core stabilizers or that core connection in general, it's not necessarily about engaging muscle. It's more about bringing awareness to the body and really going deep introspectively into that awareness. So it's working from a depth of practice, but also is doing the whole having to turn off all the loud music, let go of all the distractions, and actually be in the moment. And it's when we're in the moment, it's when we're working viscerally, so internally, that we're more aware of those muscles rather than switching them on. So multifidi are working with transverse abdominals. So transverse abs wrap around the body, and there's quite a bit of fascia involved in the transverse abs. And they also work as stabilizers. So from the bottom of the rib cage to the top of the pelvis, wrapping around the body, my transverse abs are stabilizers as well. So when I think of those four muscles, and I don't know if you listened to the episode that I had with Madeline Black. Oh, goodness me, that was quite a while ago. If you haven't, that was episode 27. When I spoke to Madeline, she has done a lot of work with Gil Headley, with Stephen Levin, and I can't think of the other girl's name, with a lot of the fascia folk. And Madeline brought up a really good point about us being very aware of the language that we're using. So when we work with the body in movement, then really we are honoring the body as a whole. Like I said before, we don't isolate muscles. We simply don't, because there is no muscle isolation in the body. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, every single fiber, every single tissue in my body is connected, is activated, is present, is alive, is working, is contracting at an appropriate tone for me to do the activity that I'm doing. And the same is happening for you, no matter what you're doing. So it is important, I think, as Pilates professionals, that we are very aware of the language that we use. So it's not that you're switching on any one of these muscles independently. It is that they are working together as a team, cohesively, coherently, intuitively, and appropriately. Now, the body is very, very intelligent, but we are a little bit stupid. So we have this idea that we need to switch something on, which it actually does not make sense. What we want to do, and especially because Pilates is not working against heavy load, we're not picking up 200 kilograms. What we are doing is asking people to move well, in good form, in good alignment, with great awareness control and stability and care of their body, I suppose. If we really thought about the Pilates principles, which I know, Joseph Pilates did not make up the principles, but this is what we teach to, is the principles, then we're not bracing because we're not lifting 200 kilograms. We're really working against not much more than body load. Pilates is designed for us to do every single day. Now, I definitely went through a phase where I was like, Pilates is not enough. Like, it's not enough load for my body. But what the reality was that I was not doing enough. When I do 5 Pilates classes a week, I stay super strong. And I actually don't need to do the heavy loading. I'm not anti-heavy loading. I think that heavy loading is really fantastic and it definitely has its place. And I encourage everybody to go and try heavy loading, especially the aging. But Pilates, the thing is, you've just got to do more of Pilates than heavy load anyway. So yeah, it's not like we're telling people to switch muscles on. It's that we're teaching people concepts. So these are some concepts that I have had a lot of awareness in my body since having this experience of this beautiful instructor using the phrase belly button to spine, because I want us all to do better. I want us to stand out in the crowd, and I want Pilates to be elevated in a way that, yes, it is available to everybody, but that it actually matters, that it's not just exercise on a reformer. Not that exercise on a reformer isn't fun. I see a lot of fun things happening out there on Instagram. They look super fun, but they're not Pilates. And so there was a reason that somebody chose Pilates, and they choose Pilates because it promises so many beautiful things to happen in the body, but they can only happen if we are teaching things well. So let's imagine you are laying down and you could be doing any of the following. So any of the supine work, and I'm just going to use the reformer, but you could actually be using any of the machines because I've played around on all of the machines, but Pilates Pro Academy specialty is reformer, and that's only because I want to elevate the status of reformer in the world. And I believe that reformer instructors do have a place right next to us in the same room with comprehensively taught instructors. Now, I am comprehensively taught, like 4 diplomas under my belt on all of the equipment, and every day I use all of the equipment, but Pilates Pro Academy specifically teaches reformer, so I'm going to use reformer as the example. So you can lay down on your reformer. Either say you've got your feet on the foot bar for footwork, you've got your feet in straps for hip work, or you've got your hands in straps for supine arms. Now, this works really well with any of those exercises. And in fact, you could do any of the supine stuff, but let's just use those as an example. When I exhale, then remember that is when actively, if I was standing, then my diaphragm is going to lift to push all of the air out of my body. But when I'm laying down, now my relationship to gravity has changed. So my diaphragm and my pelvic floor are actually working differently to if I was standing. So when I'm standing, if I inhale, my pelvic floor descends, and so does my diaphragm. If I exhale, my pelvic floor ascends and my diaphragm pushes up. But it's different when I lay down, because as soon as I lay flat, then my diaphragm sits heavy into the back of the rib cage. So now when I'm laying on my back, this is actually what I'm thinking. I'm definitely not imprinting my lumbar spine. I'm not tilting my pelvis under. I'm maintaining a wide, flat sacrum, and I'm maintaining width in the back of the rib cage. My lumbar spine, I am not trying to change the shape of it. I'm just letting it lay naturally, because I know that I have heard a lot of people say tuck your tail under or imprint your low back. No, I don't want you to do that at all. Just lay there naturally. But as you inhale on any of these exercises, what I focus on now when I'm really, really mindful of it as I inhale, I feel the back of my rib cage widen. So, your ribs, in between each individual rib, you've got intercostals. So they are the muscles in between each rib. So ultimately, as I inhale, for me to be laterally breathing, which is Pilates breathing, I want those ribs to expand. I want the intercostals to actually, remember, all muscles are toned. So those intercostals are now eccentrically working. They're opening up. And as my intercostals open up and I take that deep breath in, fill up my lungs, then I allow for the back of the rib cage to stay wide into the bed or into the mat if you're doing mat work. And I feel that my diaphragm, which is that upside down jellyfish that's normally floating in my rib cage, but now it's kind of laying on the bed, I'm feeling my diaphragm widen into the space that my rib cage is on the bed. You get that? And then as you exhale, I want you to think of trying to keep the back of your rib cage wide on the bed. So it's a deep inhale and a deep exhale. And if anything, what happens is as I inhale, there's the widening through the back of the rib cage. The diaphragm is eccentrically opening and eccentrically contracting to allow for the space of my lungs, which now are sitting still in my rib cage, but different relationship to gravity. And as I exhale, because and at the same time, the side of my ribs are expanding as well. As I exhale, because my relationship to gravity is different, and now I'm laying on my back rather than standing, my diaphragm does not push up. It actually feels, and I'm not getting sciencey on you, I'm just telling you what I feel viscerally. It actually feels like as I exhale, it's able to splay wider. And as that happens, I don't have to imprint my lumbar spine or tilt my pubic bone at all. I'm able to maintain width through the sacrum and my natural spine shape. But as I exhale, I can feel my tummy muscles, so probably my transverse abdominals and all of my other tummy muscles, because they're all growing out of each other, start to kind of flatten a little bit into the body. And when I think about what it feels like there's quite a big brick that's sitting on the front of my pelvis, on my belly, but closer towards my pubic bone, so filling up the space of my pubic bone, my ASIS, my anterior superior iliac spine, and maybe towards my belly button. There's a sense of that sinking down as I exhale. And when I exhale and that sinks down, because that brick is getting heavier, I can feel my sacrum in turn widen. Now, this is what's happening depending on what I'm doing, whether I've got my feet on the bar or my feet in straps. If I've got my feet on the bar or my feet in straps and my exhale, I'm pushing my legs out straight, then naturally my pelvic floor is going to be concentrically contracting or shortening. So remember the bird's eye view of my pelvis when I was looking down, it looks like a circle. Well, those bones are actually coming closer to each other. So sits bones, pubic bone, tailbone are all coming closer to each other as I exhale and straighten my legs, which would be happening the same when I'm standing. And as I inhale and bend the knees, whether my feet are in straps or on the bar, then my pelvic floor is naturally working eccentrically. The thing is, when I'm laying on my back, then the pelvic floor muscles are not working against the natural gravitational forces. So normally if I'm standing, then gravity is going to be pulling me downwards, which is where women with pelvic floor issues, in particular a loose pelvic floor or a lax pelvic floor, they may struggle. But here I can work the fibers of those tissue without being loaded under gravity. And that can be a really great thing just to get those muscles working. But I do want us to remember that Pilates is all about function. So at some stage in the class, then I'm definitely getting them upright and doing similar movements. Now, if I am working with somebody with pelvic floor dysfunction, then sometimes I can't load them when they're standing. Laying down is actually a safe place for them to be. So that's for you to have that discussion with that unique individual. But on the whole, definitely feeling what happens in the back of the rib cage, back of the sacrum as I inhale and exhale to allow for the expansion is encouraging my muscles of my core to, in general, be working eccentrically a lot of the time. And eccentric contraction is one of the magic things about Pilates that then creates stronger and, in inverted commas, longer, because I know we can't lengthen muscles, but that takes away the inflexibility of muscle. Now, when it comes to multifidi, how do I know they're working? Because they're so deep. Something that I've been playing around with is, and I actually do it all the time with clients and it's worked for years. If you're laying down, there is this sense of, again, not imprinting your spine, because imprinting your spine is actually then going to load up those multifidi and it's going to make them too long. You want to keep them in their natural shape. So you should have the natural lordosis of your spine when you're laying down. It may be a little bit different, but you're certainly not actively imprinting the spine. Rather, there's this sense of length through the whole body. So it's almost like I imagine my spine is a piece of bubble gum, and the piece of bubble gum is getting pulled through one end and then out the other end as I'm doing things like my footwork and my arm work, but in particular as I'm doing something like feet in straps, because feet in straps inherently is an unstable position. So remembering that stability is not rigidity, it's feeling the heaviness of the ribs, the wideness of the ribs, and the heaviness and wideness of the sacrum at the same time as this elongation or this length or this pulling in opposite direction through the spine, through the middle of the body, that is going to encourage multifidi or just bring awareness to the multifidi being innervated. And then I'm going to play with that again standing up. So all of that you could then play with maybe skater or something on the reformer, any type of deep squats, so any type of squatting work, also any type of the seated box work. So quite often we will translate the high kneeling arm work on the reformer to sitting on the long box and just getting an awareness then of where the sits bones are placed. Now the sits bones are nice and wide, but there's still the width through the sacrum and the width through the rib cage, whilst also getting that bubblegum effect of the pulling through the spine from the top to the bottom of it to really innervate multifidi. And all of that is going to be working with transverse abs. So I feel like transverse abs partly, and again, we can't isolate muscle, that's not how the body works, but transverse abs is partly that feeling, if you're laying supine, of the bricks sitting on the belly, of the widening through, it's the widening almost like when you put the brick on the belly when you're laying down, then it helps for the belly underneath to spread out wide, and that's encouraging transverse abs to work as well. These are just food for thought. I definitely over the years have stepped further away from cueing people to, in inverted commas, connect muscle or switch muscle on. And I rather use language that is bringing awareness to what may be happening and asking questions of my clients, So when you do this exercise, what do you feel? And sometimes they don't know, because a lot of the time people come to Pilates and they're actually not body people. That's why they come to Pilates. It's a safe space, but it's opening the conversation up with people to receive feedback from them so that I can start to learn from the body, from their body, what their experience is. And as I start to gather and collate the information that I'm receiving from thousands and thousands of bodies over the years, then that is where I'm really getting my cues and my images and my instruction from, rather than cueing somebody to lift the pelvic floor. There's a real downside to getting stuck in that corner, or draw the belly button to the spine. There's a real downside to getting stuck in that corner as well. And one of the reasons, or some of the reasons I don't like belly button to spine, is that it does encourage that imprint of the low back. And we don't need to imprint. Like I said, we're not working against super heavy load. If your people cannot lift both legs to tabletop when they're laying supine on the reformer, then modify the exercise for them rather than getting them to imprint the spine. What we're trying to help our clients achieve is good joint placement. And good joint placement, I think, when we cue something like belly button to spine, when we are supine, so laying on the back, imagine that. So imagine you cue belly button to spine, so they imprint their spine. And then I want you to take that person from that position. So they've got their legs in tabletop and their arms to the ceiling as if they're about to do their arm work. Or if you could flip that person up the other way and sit them in a couch, that's exactly the shape that they are in when they're sitting on the couch at home watching TV in a poor posture, which is actually what we're trying to unravel. So if you are cueing that in the class, and then you're allowing for that compensatory pattern, you're allowing for that bad postural habit. Whereas if we encourage people to maintain their natural lordoses and still feel their core working, then we're actually allowing for the femur, for the legs to sit better into the hip sockets, and we're really innovating those deep core muscles, which are inhibited when we sit on the couch. So we've got to be super aware of what shape am I placing my client in when I'm cueing something, and is that a shape that is going to then improve the way that they function, or is that a shape that their body is so familiar with that it's not going to be doing them any favors? It's definitely food for thought, and I would love for you to really expand your vision and expand the way that you're seeing the body when you're working with it. That we're not just teaching the Pilates repertoire for the sake of the Pilates repertoire. All of the Pilates repertoire is designed for function. And if an exercise is not going to improve function of the person in front of me, then I don't use the exercise. So for example, in my classes, we rarely will do hundreds because I work with so many people who have like tight neck and shoulders anyway. Why would I want to exacerbate that and put that shape against load? Just food for thought. I hope that has given you a little bit of clarification about why I don't use the cue belly button to spine. And that's really just in supine. If you think about what happens when people stand up and you cue belly button to spine, then quite often it's going to encourage them to brace their torso, which in turn is going to restrict their ability to breathe well. And remember, diaphragm works in concert with pelvic floor. So if I'm in a shape that then is actually shortening the front of my body like belly button to spine does and put me in a slight flexion, I'm not able to fully take my inhalation. It forces me into this deep exhale, which actually, remember, exhale not only pushes the diaphragm up, but it also elevates the pelvic floor. Having a wound up pelvic floor is not fun for everybody, or anybody, I should say. And in my world, when you say belly button to spine when you're standing, it actually ends up encouraging what I call a tight ass. So a tight ass is when you tuck your tail under and you end up squeezing your butt. It's not doing anybody any favors. So really consider, what it is that you're saying and why is it that you're saying things. Try and find better ways to say things and practice the work in your body. I promise you that is really where your answers come. It's from feeling the work in your own body and questioning everything that you have learned up until now. Now, listen up, my friends. I've got something super important to share with you today. I've had quite a few people reach out to me and they want mentoring, and they're either doing their own certification of Pilates now, or they've been out teaching for a few years and they're getting a lot of information from the podcast, which is awesome, but they're looking for more. So I am actually opening applications in the next few weeks to join my mentorship program, which you don't have to do your teacher training with me. It's actually a program for people who want to continue to learn. Now, this is online, and we'll have like regular meetups online where we all get together and we talk in depth about a concept. So if you're really enjoying the podcast, but you want action, so you want to meet face-to-face online, you want some virtual learning, then my mentor program is for you. I'm going to be releasing more information about it in the next few weeks because I'm just starting to put it together. I've just had a few interviews this week with potential students. It will be an application process because I want to make sure that the people that join the group, we are the right group, the right fit to be together. But I'm super excited. This has kind of been just sitting in the wings for a little while now. And I feel that now is the time for me to act on this. So stay tuned. But if you would like more information, feel free anytime to send me an email, katie@thepilatesprofessional.com.au, and just inquire about the mentor program. Thanks so much for joining me this week. I really hope that this has been as enjoyable for you to listen to as what it is for me to share with you. I just love sharing my insights into the body with you. Have a fabulous week, my friends. My name's Katie Crane. I am the Pilates Professional, and this is the Pilates Lounge podcast. Goodbye for now.